I created this video to help other people who are kind of stuck on the CS50 projects because I feel like there's a huge gap between like what they teach you and what the projects are about. And so a lot of the things you need to like learn about yourself. And this is basically a step-by-step tutorial about the views.py page. And it's to help you like identify the bugs that you have. And in case that my explanations are not thorough enough, I've also included a lot of commentary below every line of code to explain what I'm doing. And please don't copy, because at the end of the day you want to understand what you're doing so that you can do it, replicate it yourself in the future. So just take a look at the code and try and understand what's going on. But it's always very helpful to read the documentation, and I'll include that below. So firstly, I'll be going over views.py. Firstly, we import a specific function called render from the shortcuts module, which renders a page. And then we import the specific function called markdown from markdown 2, which basically converts markdown to HTML. But later, I found out that we really don't need to use this, and we can actually use markdown, which is also like another function that converts markdown to HTML. And then you can assign markdown a name. So here we assign the name of markdowner, and you can read more about modules in the link that will be included in the description. So from dot import util, and then basically this dot is the same meaning that the same file directory. So basically you're importing it from the same root file. And then you import markdown, and I have installed this through pip before, so then I can just basically import it, and you import it to convert markdown to HTML, which you then render onto the page. And then import random. This random module will help us randomly choose between entries, which is for later. So then we go on to our different functions. So def and then the function name and then the arguments that you pass in is basically the format that they're supposed to be in. And then you indent into the next line, which is how you get where you put the functions. And so here I comment saying that this is the home page, and it basically renders the index page and gives the page a list of entries that are created by util.listEntries. Things that exist in utils is something used in many places or doesn't fit somewhere else. So then we return the page by rendering it, passing in two arguments. One is the request, and then second is the link. And then arguments that we want to include in the page. So for example, entries, and then we get from the util, which is basically util basically holds all the functions that you use regularly on a page, and so we use it as a shortcut so that we don't have to write it each time. And then you put util.entries, and then remember the parentheses because it's a function. And then you go on to convert to HTML. Now this is also like a shortcut, and you might be wondering then if it's a shortcut, why don't we just put it into util? But it already uses a shortcut from util, so it doesn't really work. And this function basically turns input into markdown language and is later used by the search function and others. I think it turns the markdown into HTML. So then firstly, you would get the entry by using the util shortcut function, and then you turn it into HTML. So HTML would be equal to markdown entry. And this basically goes into the markdown module, gets the markdown function, and then puts it in the markdown entry, markdown version of the entry into here. And if it is entry, but if it doesn't exist, then you return none. And then you return HTML, because basically we want to return this thing and render it. And next function is entry. So you define entry and pass in request and title. And this function is used to generate the entry, but since each entry differs, the request will take in title as an argument. So it gets the page from util first, like before. And if entry is none, then it renders the non-exist page, and then it says whatever page is doesn't exist on the page. And then else then it would return the actual page if it does exist, right? And what you pass in is the entry, which is the HTML version of the entry, so that it can directly and render it on the template. And then you also pass in the title, so that you know what the entry here will be on the link, as well as the title. Okay, next function is the search function. This function is placed in the search bar and searches for pages that renders them. So firstly, if request method is get, then we do this. And what get is that it only reads the data and searches for data, so it's really good for searching, but it's not really good for changing data, because there's a lot of security flaws in get. So instead we use post when we're trying to change data. But now we're just reading data and fetching data, so it's not that big of a deal. So then firstly, our input would be equal to the get, and then get the input under the name Q. And then HTML, we convert the input into HTML using the function we created before. And then entries, we get all the entry name of the entries for later use to go through all of the entries and see if the function that we want is in the entries. And then we also create a empty list, so that we can put all the pages that contain stuff surrounding the page that we searched into that list, and then we render the list. So firstly, for entry into entries, if input to upper, so the reason why we're using upper is that, let's say that a person types in CSS, but then our function is actually CSS. And since this is case sensitive, it doesn't really work. So by putting dot upper for both of them, this basically just becomes CSS as well, uppercase CSS. So then it works. And here, if the entry is somewhat similar, or is included in the word of the entry, for example, CS is included in CSS, then we append the entry. Now, so then we loop through all of them, and we find all of them that are similar. What else did I say? Yeah. So secondly, for entries in entries, here we check if the entry is already in entries by going through all the entries in entries. And if we do this before it, and it says no, then basically it will output non-exist. So we can't do that too early. So that's why we do the list first. We take the list out and do it here. And then so if input to upper is equal to entry to upper, exactly equal, see this, double equal, we make sure, and we also make sure it works for different types of capitalization. Then we render the page, which is encyclopedia/entry.html, and we pass in firstly we pass in the HTML, which we converted before, and we also parse in the title. And then if it, like, the search pages, that's not equal to like an empty function, that means that we have searched before and there are like some similarities, and we render the page search.html, which creates a list on the page and shows you like which search pages are similar. And if both of these are not true, then we know that like there's nothing related between the search and the page that they were searching. So basically the page won't exist, and we render a non-existing entry and we tell them what page doesn't exist. Okay, next function, new page request. So basically here, this function allows people to go to the forum where they can create a new page, and then we render this new page.html, which is basically a form, and nothing is really passed in because you don't know what they're going to render, what they want to see, and it's just like a form that doesn't really differ. And then there's the function save request. This function returns the information from the post request on the create new page template. A template is basically a page on the web, and this function will then use the util function to save this page. So if the request method is post, and you see this time it's post instead of get, because you're basically changing the data in the system because you're saving data into it. And then input title is also retrieved by like getting, as before, getting the name of like the input. So let me just show you. So it's a new page, and we want to save it. After we save it, we want to retrieve, for example, we want to retrieve this input, and the name is title. So then here you retrieve its name, which is title. And the same goes for other pieces. And entries will equal to the list of entries from util, and HTML will be equal to the converted MD page, markdown page, which is under the input title page. And if it already exists, then like it will be false, right? If it already exists, then it will be true. So firstly we search that if it already exists, and if that's true, then like if there is a title that is equal to the title that the person is trying to save, then already exists is true. If already exists is true, then we render already exists page, and we tell them what pages already existent, whether they want to edit that already existing page. And then else, we would save the entry, and this is also like another shortcut called util save entry, which saves the input text and also the input title. And this is markdown text, as you can see, so like basically directly saves as markdown. Next, you would just return the entry page that they recently saved. Okay, last three functions. So random page request. This generates a random page. So firstly you get the entries, and you create a list entries from util, and then you get to choose from this list of entries. So ran entry and random.choice allows you to pick from your existing list and gives you like a different part of the array every time. And we get this from the random module that we imported earlier. And then HTML is like convert to HTML from the random entry before, which is in markdown. So after we do that, we would render this page on the internet, and the entry would be equal to HTML, while the title would be equal to the ran entry, which is the title of the page here. Okay. Next, so edit page. If requests equals to post. So again, we're changing data because we're editing the page. So use the post version, not the get version for the request. And the input title will be equal to request.post title because this is the name of the input. And the text is equal to util.getEntry input title, and basically this is still in markdown, right? Yeah, it's still in markdown, and you want to initiate the form with the latest text that's under the page, and we pass it into the page as a variable. We don't turn this to HTML because the user uses markdown to change it. So this is what is initiated on the page, and we return like a page, edit page, the HTML, and here is the entry text, and the entry title is put on the page. And what that page, like what you do with the text is basically, you put it here, so text area here, you put the already existing entry here so that they can just like directly manipulate it and then submit. Okay, last function, save edit request. So if the request method is equal to post, which is basically, it has to be equal to post because you're changing data, and entry title is equal to the name of the title, like name of the input, which is title, as previously mentioned. So I won't go into detail about that. And then util.saveEntry. Basically you save the entry under the MD markdown form and also the title, which is the two arguments you pass in. And the HTML is then converted from like the markdown from entry title into the actual HTML, and then you render that. And this time you're rendering an actual HTML page, so you do need to convert it, unlike in edit page. And that's it. Thank you. Yeah, just
it's 9 o'clock.
Try and understand the code.